Salutations, one and all, and welcome to RWBY Revisited. This time, let's break down the fight between Team RWBY and the Aesops. So before this begins, let's assess the situation. Whenever you write a fight scene, you have to ask yourself a few questions. What are the strengths and weaknesses of the combatants? What are their objectives? What's the terrain like? All of these play a huge factor in determining how a fight scene will play out. Team RWBY's sole objective in this battle is to escape. To do so, they need to either get past the Aesops or beat them enough so that they can't pursue. This gives them an advantage in that they can use pretty much whatever means necessary to get away. There's no reason for them to hold back. The Aesops are already at a disadvantage. Their objective is to apprehend Team RWBY, not kill them. This means that they have to hold back, at least to some extent. If they go all out and game over their targets, then they've failed their objective. The terrain is inside Atlas Academy, inside Ironwood's office. Now, realistically, this area should have tons of soldiers, probably high-ranking soldiers around, but none are present for whatever reason. So even though they should interfere and make things more difficult for Team RWBY, this fight remains a 4v4.
Really?
But the first thing that happens is that Harriet seals the windows. Given that gravity has always been portrayed as more of a method of transportation rather than a threat in this series, that's an excellent move. It denies their quarry an obvious escape route.
Please, don't make this difficult.
Don't make us have to get out of here by force.
Vine then tries to de-escalate the situation, offering to accept Team RWBY's surrender without the need for violence. Now, regardless of your stance on the matter of who's right here, hardly anyone is going to meekly submit to being incarcerated, guilty or not, especially when they have the means to fight their way out or get away somehow.
Whoa. We're not actually going to slug this out, are we?
3 members of Team RWBY then ready their weapons, prompting the Aesops to prepare in response, with the exception of Marrow, who questions if they're going to escalate the situation. We already have a bit of a problem here. Remember when I said that you need to remember every character's strengths and weaknesses? Well, one of those strengths would completely change the game here. Marrow, your semblance lets you freeze multiple targets completely in place. If you don't want the situation to escalate, why aren't you using it? The only ones who could do anything while immobilized would be Weiss and maybe Blake. That still leaves Harriet, Vine, and Elm available to deal with any summons or illusions.
We're not doing anything. They decide what happens next. You think you're going to stop us? We're the best huntsmen in Atlas.
But then Harriet proceeds to trash talk, claiming to be the best huntsman in Atlas. Well, if you're the best, then surely you can prove it with your actions. If you're the best, then you'd have no need to declare yourself such. This is why you should laugh at those who trash talk. It's only a sign of their fragile sense of self that they then try to project onto others. If you know what you're capable of, then you won't need it. Unfortunately, RWBY also partakes in it.
You were. Then you trained us.
Whether this was genuine, or merely an attempt to provoke Harriet and make her lose her cool is unknown. Harriet does have a very fragile ego, and enraging an opponent is a good way to get them to overextend. But we need to take stock of the combatant's abilities here. RWBY's semblance allows her to move at incredibly high speeds, and this poses a massive risk to the Aesop's ability to accomplish their task. RWBY has an incredible amount of control over this fight, which she doesn't capitalize on. If Harriet doesn't pursue her personally, then RWBY could just escape on her own, and then they'd have failed to apprehend all of their targets. This means that Harriet has to chase her. RWBY can dictate an enemy combatant's actions by herself, which is incredibly useful. Now the remaining 6 combatants clash, but Marrow is still not using his semblance. Even with Harriet gone, a frozen Blake, Weiss, and Yang should still be easily subdued by his squad mates. Not only that, but Vine demonstrates in the next season that his semblance lets him encase a wide area like he did with the bomb. Either of these powers would all but ensure that the remaining members of Team RWBY would be captured. Even if Vine's semblance couldn't hold them, they would still have to use precious resources to escape his semblance. Stamina, ammunition, and aura are all resources that these characters need to keep track of. If the Aesops force Team RWBY to expend these, then they make it that much easier to defeat them. But there is another factor to consider: their lack of leadership. Clover is the commander of the Aesops, and this sequence shows us quite blatantly that they rely on him. With his absence, they don't fight as a unit, instead acting almost entirely independent of one another. Even Vine and Elm more or less just fight in the same area later, rather than working together. If asked, I would say that this would factor into how members of this unit are slotted in and out when one dies in action. That, and their deliberate effort to remain distant with each other, means that they aren't a unit. Without Clover, we also remove the fickle aspect of the luck semblances. Luck-based powers are something that I am almost always opposed to. Luck, by its very definition, is vague, and thus you can never truly tell if a character's skill won the day, or the writer needed a get-out-of-jail-free card. Clover and Crow both passively influence luck, and thus events must always be called into question whenever they're present. Thankfully, we don't have to worry about that here. It's all up to the characters on their own merits. RWBY retreats to a short distance, then comes to a stop. Why she does this, I can't fathom. Harriet is unstable and all too eager to do you physical injury. You need to find an advantage before you confront her. Speed is your ally. Being stationary puts you at her mercy. Harriet actually kicks RWBY hard enough for her to dent the doors of an elevator, but RWBY's aura doesn't flare up at this. That would take some significant force, so I'm not sure how she just shrugged that off.
Come on, Harriet! We're playing right into Salem's hands! You know we need to be working together!
Oh, don't give me that crap. I had you kids pegged right from the start.
But RWBY now tries to reason with Harriet. Whether she egged her on to get her into an isolated area so that she could attempt to make her see reason is unknown, but I guess it's what makes the most sense for this scenario. Unfortunately, Harriet has the maturity of an adolescent and the mental capacity of one younger, so words of reason fall on deaf ears. We then get to see an interesting exchange between Yang and Elm, the two heavyweights of their teams. Yang throws a flurry of punches at Elm, eventually landing a hit. Elm quickly recovers though, and strikes Yang in return. Both hits send the other flying, but I'd still have to give the advantage to Elm. Not counting the shotgun portion of her gauntlets, Yang's only weapons are her fists, even if one is made of metal. Elm has a massive hammer, and that will always do more damage than a fist. That's why our ancestors didn't go into combat unarmed. Now, I know people will cite that aura lets Yang hit harder, but by that same token, it will also allow Elm to hit harder, bringing us back to a level playing field. Yang should use something like a mace or flail to deal more damage than just her hands will dish out. I'd also give Elm the advantage in that she seems to be more durable than Yang, as she straight up headbutts her during her charge. Most of the time, Yang just bulldozes through anyone or anything in her way, but sending your opponent flying creates another problem. Now, Elm has to chase down Yang again. Blake has somehow entered the room though. When this happened is unclear, as we can see Vine is only just now entering. So what was going on with these two? Blake just evades Vine's attempts to grab her though. She doesn't make any attempt to retaliate, she just jumps and swings around like she's practicing for a Spider-Man audition. Oddly though, Yang has somehow gotten back into this room around Elm, who was chasing her. How she managed that, I'm not sure. She lobs a few small explosives at Elm, but they do about as much as a sneeze. Strangely though, Elm chases Yang around the perimeter of this circular chamber. Why don't you just run across it where Yang will inevitably end up? You'll catch her much more easily. She even flubs a lunging attack during this. Look at where she hits.
If you come peacefully, we won't hurt you.
Blake, who has contributed nothing to this fight so far, is then caught by Vine, which is what tends to happen when you don't fight back. Blake really has been getting the raw end of the choreography for a while now, hasn't she? But Vine passes her off to Elm, who restrains her, and offers Yang the chance to stand down. That should be game over, for Blake at least. Vine, get the cuffs out and put them on Blake. You can still grant Yang the chance to surrender while you do so. This would then force Yang to either confront you directly, submit, or try to escape. If she goes after you, then Elm can cuff Blake while you deal with Yang, and one of your 4 targets is restrained. If she runs away, then Blake is still in your custody. If she submits, then you've gotten 2 of them.
Speak for yourself! They betrayed us!
You're betraying the people you've sworn to protect!
It's not worth it, Blake. They're just following orders now.
Elm then has an outburst instead of cuffing Blake, which then prompts Blake to retort that they're abandoning their people. Admittedly, Ironwood could still send evac shuttles, but that's besides the point. Yang then gives a snappy remark, but Vine, now was the perfect opportunity for you to grab her. She was distracted by Elm's outburst. Why didn't you do anything? But Elm, like Harriet, is easily provoked, and instead of putting the cuffs on Blake, she instead opts to throw her into the wall and charge Yang. You had one of your targets apprehended, and now you've lost her. Vine sighs at this, and it mirrors my sentiments. Now Blake can recover, whereas before she was yours. But Vine then instead elects to go climbing on the windowsill instead of grabbing Blake while she's stunned, and Yang just stands there and eats another hammer stroke. Weiss and Marrow are now the only ones left in the office, engaged in a little duel of their own. Now, both of these characters have incredibly powerful semblances. Marrow could freeze Weiss in place, while she could put a glyph around him to pin him to the floor, ceiling, or a wall. Instead, neither of them are doing any such thing. Weiss initially uses glyphs to propel herself from melee strikes, and then Marrow decides to throw his weapon at her. Throwing your weapon is generally ill-advised. Once it leaves your hand, you can't use it for any other purpose. Even if you can retrieve it, it will still leave you vulnerable for a second, which is all a skilled opponent needs. But Weiss then opts to freeze the floor instead of Marrow. I don't know why you wouldn't use that ice against your enemy instead of the ground. The first option would either damage him or force him to evade, while the second accomplishes little other than making the ground slick. Clearly, the second option is inferior.
I know you sneeze are used to getting what you want, but it's time to let this one go.
Marrow just sort of watches her while she then preps a second attack, forcing him to jump over her flames and become blinded by a frosty mist.
Oh!
This is my home, and I'm not giving it up without a fight.
This in turn allows her to conjure her Armagigas, making things even more difficult for him. This is why you don't just stand around in fights. In a real fight, you always need to be doing something. Even if you're not advancing, keeping constant movement will mask your real advance and keep your enemy on their toes. Staying still gets you nothing. But RWBY is still just running from Harriet for the most part. Again, she stops for no reason, and Harriet kicks her back into the office. A confined space is not where you want to be right now. You've lost your advantage of speed and the potential for escape. You have to either go on the offensive or lead Harriet away. She does manage to deflect Marrow's boomerang from Weiss though, who also just sort of watched it approach without doing anything.
Marrow, cut the crap, will you?
I'm trying to arrest her, not kill her, Hair. You're being excessive.
Marrow and Harriet then have a quarrel with each other, but RWBY and Weiss do nothing while the two are completely distracted. If you were looking for the opportune moment, that was it. That was your cue to hit these two with your best shot. But again, the Aesops are not a true unit. As of now, they have no leader and squabble among themselves like children, unbecoming of a military squad. Without Clover there to tell them what to do, they crumble.
It's not excessive if it's necessary.
Weiss finally attacks, but the moment has already passed, and both Aesops easily dodge the strike, and Weiss doesn't follow it up. Whenever you commit to an attack, commit. Don't just throw one strike. Keep throwing them until you either disengage or subdue your opponent. But RWBY books it out of there again, forcing Harriet to give chase once more. We then cut back to Yang and Blake, and Elm does a remarkable job of smacking them both down. Take note of their moves. Yang just charges in, her fists brought up for uppercuts so that Elm knows well in advance exactly how she's going to strike. Don't do that. Not only is her attack telegraphed, but she jumps straight in, letting her opponent know where she's going to be. Yang's own momentum worked against her as she rammed herself onto Elm's hammer. Blake then tries to throw her weapon at Elm, which, as previously stated, a bad idea. But not only did this deprive Blake of using her weapon while it's being thrown, it was also loud, alerting Elm that it was coming. The third mistake of this move is that the weapon is tethered to you, which is exactly what allows Elm to counterattack. And all of this was done while Vine was just playing Assassin's Creed up in the rafters. Blake gets grabbed a second time and then slammed into a wall. She should be completely out of the fight here. Vine has apprehended her again. A short exchange between Yang and Elm follows, but I have to wonder how Elm's position shifted between her first strike and her second. Yang evades the first one, and then Elm redirects her momentum into a downward swing, but then she somehow ends up grappling with Yang. Her momentum just vanished all of a sudden. Yang does a nice move of blasting away with both shotgun gauntlets, which knocks Elm away and gives her a moment. She launches an explosive at Vine, who then just drops Blake for no reason. Dude, that explosive did nothing to you. Why did you drop your target?
Time to wrap this up, Vine. They've had their chance. Don't be soft.
Are you telling me? Or yourself?
But Vine then elects to grab hunks of the masonry. Why he does this, I can't say. Through grabbing alone, you apprehended Blake twice. Why Blake hasn't used her illusions more in this fight, though, is another question that's been nagging me. Illusions are incredibly powerful, depriving your opponents of their ability to accurately perceive the fight. You should be spamming them whenever you get a chance. But Yang and Blake then move on Elm at the same time and manage to evade her attack. Afterwards, they split up, and we don't get a good look at Blake and Elm as the camera shifts to focus on Vine throwing rubble at Yang, though his aim leaves much to be desired. Yang then catches a hunk of debris and plants her explosives on it. I have to wonder how she hasn't had to reload. She's always spammed her weapons, and yet somehow only Blake has ever been seen to run dry. Blake is now somehow on the ceiling, with Elm nowhere to be found. But Vine grabs what he thinks is her after swatting aside the rock, only to see that Blake has now finally used her semblance, causing him to actually have brought the explosives right to him. Weirdly enough though, the shockwave sends him in the completely wrong direction. The explosives were in front of him when they detonate, and yet somehow he gets thrown towards their explosion instead of away. That should have sent him the other way, not back into the room. Yang then manages to snatch his restraints and apply them to Vine, but shouldn't he be able to still use his semblance? Even if he can only project it from his hands, it's still shown to be incredibly flexible. It's entirely possible that he could still be in the fight. But he's then thrown into the ground, losing consciousness as his aura breaks. We then get to see Elm has been standing there doing nothing during this. How Blake evaded her is unknown. Maybe it was via using her semblance? A quick point I'd like to make. Both Elm and RWBY use two-handed weapons, but they've always been depicted as only striking with the head. In a fight, especially the 2v1 that Elm now finds herself in, striking with the butt or haft of your weapon is a great option. It obviously won't do as much damage as hitting with the head, but it'll still hurt, and it will let you attack faster than prepping another swing in some instances. But that's one ace operative down. This fight just became a 3v4. Bad odds.
All along I thought our friendship was true.
But then we see RWBY, Harriet, Weiss, and Marrow are just staring at this. How they were aware of Vine's KO, I'm not sure, but nobody is capitalizing on everyone's distraction. If your opponent looks away, that's the most perfect opening you could ever ask for. Weiss is the first to break out of this trance, but her Armagigas' attack is wound up way more than it needs to be, and thus Marrow has the time to dodge it. She then presses the advantage by pinning him to the wall with a glyph, nearly skewering him on ice spikes. Honestly, this is what I was saying you should have done right at the start to the whole group of Aesops. That would have set them up for the rest of your team to finish them off before they could have reacted. But somehow, he just seems to say nope to the glyph pushing him into the wall, as he then dodges the Gigas' subsequent attacks. Once again though, he throws his weapon at Weiss, and this time she's paying attention as she swats it away easily. Marrow was also slow on the uptake though, as only now does he use his semblance on Weiss. But it's too little, too late now. She's already conjured her summon. You should have done this before anyone on Team RWBY could move. Marrow's semblance seems to require him to maintain his attention on a target though, as he then needs to shift his attention to the Armagigas, which then allows Weiss to move again. I don't know why she twirls while preparing attacks like this, but regardless, Weiss's fireballs then KO him too. Strangely, the Armagigas still acts like it's frozen by his semblance even once his aura breaks. It's probably just an oversight, but still odd nonetheless. RWBY though seems to be mentally AFK, as she's just standing there getting hit by Harriet. RWBY, mobility is your shtick, so stop letting her hit you. But Harriet pins her to the ground, and only then does RWBY decide to do something. Using her semblance, she wraps Harriet up in her own restraints. Unfortunately, she lets her guard down after this. Never count your opponent out of a fight until they're either down for the count or one of you escapes. This lets Harriet get back up on her feet, and thus she's still in the fight. Back to Yang and Blake. The latter distracts Elm while the former breaks the floor beneath her. Yang then rushes Elm, who switches to her rocket launcher like she's going to use it. In tight confines like this, you can't ensure that there won't be collateral damage to bystanders on the floor below you, or that you won't weaken the structure itself. But we have an awkward standoff where Yang and Elm just stare at each other for a second. Elm, you could easily just smash your weapon into Yang right now. She froze for a second at the sight of the rockets. That was your chance to hit her. Yang then decides to punch the ground, which sends Elm flying upwards. Realistically, that force should also have flung Yang as well, but RWBY's always played fast and loose with physics. The two then strike Elm, one from above and one from below, causing her to be KO'd when she hits the ground. This is why I wish we had more context for how much aura a character had remaining. Vine was taken out in 2 hits, and Marrow in 1, and I find it difficult to believe that Elm would have just dropped from this. Yang even gets one-shotted by Neo in the next season, which is equally strange. But RWBY's lagging again, still just letting Harriet wail away on her with kicks and grapples. RWBY, hit her. She's trying to beat you into submission. Use your weapon. Do something. At least evade her if you can't muster up the will to smack her down. She's then bailed out by Weiss, who conjures up a wall of ice as Harriet sprints at RWBY, causing her to KO herself. She makes a last attempt at getting back into the fight, but it's over. Now, this fight had a lot of missed opportunities on both sides, and characters out of the shot just seemed to stop existing several times. What would I have done to fix this fight? Well, I'm glad you asked, you dashing and intelligent specimen. Before the fight starts, have RWBY still dash out before any of the Aesops can do anything. This means that she's out of there before Marrow can use his semblance on the whole team. While they're momentarily distracted by her sudden movement, have Weiss throw them against the walls with her glyphs. Remember that Team RWBY's objective is to escape. If you split up, then that also forces the Aesops to split up so that they can't support each other. You wouldn't even necessarily need to fight, just enough so that they can't catch you. Keep in mind what I said about minding your terrain. They're in Atlas Academy. There should realistically be more military personnel that will come running, whether that's because the Aesops radio them or they hear the commotion. Staying to fight is a bad idea, but the Aesops obviously won't make it that easy. As mentioned before, Harriet has to chase RWBY, or else RWBY could just escape. That lets RWBY take her out of the fight without having to fight her. Weiss would need to conjure summons, but probably not the Armagigas. If she could summon a greater quantity of smaller summons, then those could more easily overwhelm or distract Marrow. She's actually a great choice to fight him, as her summons let her attack from 2 or more directions at once. If she forces him to engage her, then she has the best chance of beating him. Blake should have used her semblance much more here. The Aesops are supposed to be elites, so Team RWBY needs every advantage they can get. Once RWBY distracts them and Weiss gets them an opening, she should have helped cover their escape, making illusions of herself running down each of the halls. That would cause the stunned Aesops to be confused, unsure of where she actually went. Though escape routes are limited, so they could conceivably still give chase. Vine's grabs are a huge threat, so having Blake keep him off balance with illusions would be an excellent strategy. That leaves Yang and Elm. Again, the main cast don't need to fight. All they need to do here is get away. Yang has her shotgun blasts, and if fired behind her, she can simultaneously attack Elm as she pursues her and grant her her patented speed boost. This brings me back to RWBY. She should be able to zip around the halls and give a good speed-enhanced smack to any of the Aesops chasing or fighting her team. They'll have next to no way to prepare for that, and it will let them escape that much easier. She could even pick up her teammates and carry them, though that seems to drain her energy if she does it for too long. So maybe that should be used sparingly. The Aesops also have a disadvantage in that only Marrow can safely use a ranged weapon in this fight. Elm's ranged weapon is a rocket launcher, and you can't use that in a building like this without endangering everyone else in it, so she's limited to the hammer. Vine and Harriet have no ranged weapons, so all they have is Marrow's rifle. I feel like the point that they wanted to stress in this fight was that the Aesops don't fight as a team, while Team RWBY does. That, however, was sporadic. In this version, while they're making their escape, have Team RWBY swap strikes at each other's pursuers so that they can't pin any one of them down. It's like the difference between good warriors and good soldiers. Good warriors might be better than good soldiers individually, but soldiers can fight as a team, while warriors might not. We could go for that vibe here. Let RWBY fight them off as a team to make their escape, showing that while individually the Aesops are stronger, they aren't coordinated without Clover. But these were just my observations. What were yours? This was the winner of the poll I put out, and the next one of these I do will be covering Pyrrha vs Cinder from Season 3 after my next Hidden Gems video. But if you have any thoughts on this, let us read them in the comments below, and leave a like if you're so inclined, and subscribe to see more. And may you all have a weapon in each hand.